Hi, I'm David. We just released a new version of the Julia extension for Visual Studio Code that includes a new documentation browser, and I'm going to show you how that works in this video. So in the Julia extension for Visual Studio Code, we had the ability to view help and documentation for a long time. The way documentation and help was displayed has always been inside the editor as little Hoover pop-up windows. And that works pretty well, but it also has some drawbacks. In particular, you can only look at the documentation while you have the mouse over the identifier for which you want to see documentation. And as soon as you move your mouse away, the documentation is gone. So in the latest release of the extension, we added a new documentation browser that shows the documentation in a more permanent place in the UI so that you can, for example, view a complicated documentation page for a complicated function while you edit the text in your editor, and it does not depend on your mouse being in a certain place. So the functionality is pretty simple, but I hope very useful, and I'll now show you how that works in Visual Studio Code. I have a package open, the string builders package, and I'm going to open the main file here, stringbuilders.jl. And the old style of looking at documentation is that you use the mouse and you just move it over a keyword, for example, the string keyword here, and then it will show you the documentation for that particular identifier as a pop-up, a Hoover help. And what we've added now is that you can also right-click on any identifier, and you can say, this new command here, Julia show documentation. There's also a keyboard shortcut for that, so that you can really quickly reach that UI element from the keyboard by itself as well. If I click that, then we will jump on the left-hand side here to the Julia area of the UI. And here we have this new documentation view element. And in this view element, which we can resize, you can see the same doc string that was displayed when we hovered over a string here. But there's a difference here, and that is that this documentation element will stay around. So even if I move my cursor around, I look at the documentation for abstract string or something like that, then this documentation text here will stay around. And that can be really handy if you're in the middle of coding and you look, for example, at the documentation for a really complicated function, then you might want to just have the information about that function and the documentation visible at all times. So this is the first benefit, that things stay around. You can also click on links in this documentation browser here. So for example, if I want to get more information about I/O buffer here, I can click on that, and then I'm jumping automatically to the documentation for I/O buffer here. Up here, you have a back and forward browsing functionality, so you can also easily go back to documentation that you looked at previously. The final feature in the documentation panel here is that we have a search functionality, so I can search for documentation for specific keywords. So for example, I can search for print line, and then I automatically get the documentation here for the print line function that we found. All right, I hope this was helpful. I hope you like the new feature. Do let us know whether this new format of having videos introduce new features in the extension is useful. It's a bit of an experiment, and I don't yet know whether this will work well. So feedback on that would be really welcome.